if your goal is anything but profitability, if it's to be big or to grow fast or to become a technology leader, you'll hit problems. And man, we have seen that time and time again, especially in our space, where profitability wasn't important. It was just about being the biggest, growing fast, becoming a technology leader. That's like SaaS in a nutshell. Yeah. You're like, get big, grow fast, and be a technology leader. They want all three of those things, right? Not just one. They want all three of those things.
You see all these $1 million companies. It's like, yeah, they're doing millions, but they're profiting nothing, or they're in debt.
We're all part of this whole money game. This all.
Welcome back to another episode of Beers and Business. I'm Abe Dearmer, CEO of Appsembler.
And I'm Andrew Martin, CEO of Teamgate CRM, and we're back talking budgets today. So what episode are we on now?
Episode 14, budgets and forecasting, cash flow.
Forecasting, right? Yeah, cash flow is
important stuff. Look, to be honest, it's not the most glamorous of topics to talk about, but it's probably the most important topic for any small business, and probably the biggest thing that keeps small businesses, the owners up at night, is this whole cash flow thing. Because, man, if it's a stressful time when you don't know if you're going to make payroll in the next month, or if you are unsure if you're going to be able to pay that outstanding bill, to keep the lights on. And there's a lot of external pressures that you really can't help when you're running a business that force your hand a lot of times. And it's like, oh, well, we either make more money or, we can't survive. So understanding that cash flow forecasting and budgeting is pretty essential.
Yeah, it's massive, and you hit the nail on the head. It's to have your budgeting under control and your cash flow known is a strength. But then on the flip side, if it's not, it's a business killer as well. We see it all the time in the industry we're in, where we work with companies that acquire other companies, and the biggest thing that kills a company quick is the budgeting being well out of whack, or just not in balance, and their cash flow is out the door. So
but
we'll
need
try
to
to
get
make
the
it
more important
try to
stuff,
make it entertaining, and this is how we're going to make it entertaining.
Let's get into the more important stuff. I'm going to be entertained because today I'm trying my first beer from a brewery that's in Dubbo, just down the road, Devil's Hollow. And this one is a stout because I love stouts. Why not start with it? And it's called Stumped. I actually was in Devil's Hollow last weekend, met the owner and the chief brewer over there. So funnily enough, I guess not funnily enough, but bit of a fun fact about Devil's Hollow is it's owned by two lovely ladies out of Dubbo, and they sort of just had this dream of brewing beer. And I think the story goes that they're in South Africa and just decided, screw it, we're going to do it, and opened up Devil's Hollow Brewery. And man, it is a great environment in there. Really good food, pretty good beers. I'm going to go through all of them. I only had one because I was driving, so I was nice and sensible. And going through all the beers. And the best thing about it is, one of the great things is she gave me the tasting notes that come with it.
There you go.
So I've got something to read.
Well read.
Got something to read here because there's a lot of different beers, and a lot of them have some, links back to Dubbo. So it's always exciting to see those. But the one beer that I do have is not actually on that list because this is a special. No, it's a special brew. This special one. So this one here is 2.2 standard drinks.
Oh.
So it is.
It's a lunchtime. Lucky it's a lunchtime recording for once.
That's why I thought I'd do it. Do it now, because if we were doing this at with one of the US guests or something like that, it would be a bit of a stretch. But yeah, nice pour, a little bit of spillage out of the can though. Oh, man, I can already. It's a strong one. So this is a sweet, nutty chocolate delight, chocolate and hazelnut flavors, paired with creamy sweetness and lingering bitterness in this robust milk stout.
Milk stout.
It's milk stout.
Nice. What I had last week.
And it's born in Dubbo in 1970. Glenn McGrath is considered one of the greatest international fast bowlers of all time. This week's stout is named in honour of Glenn's one and only international stumping. On the 19th of February 2005 in Wellington, New Zealand, bowling to New Zealand batsman Craig McMillan, McGrath brought a false shot from McMillan, and Adam Gilchrist wiped off the bails to give Glenn a truly iconic dismissal. Stumped. Enjoy responsibly and always keep cool. There you go.
Nice. What do you reckon about the can? I like the black at the top.
Yeah, so all of their cans. So the brewery, when you go inside, it's like very industrial. Everything, like it's got black, I guess, accents all throughout it. And so this just matches that whole theme that they have going on here. And all their cans are pretty similar. I do like they've got their core colours, which is black, white, and red, which is very much, very simplistic, right? But all of their pictures, like it stands out with the white there across it. So, yeah, it's really cool brewery. They've done a fantastic job in there, and I look forward to trying all the beers and probably going across there every once in a while they actually do a really good breakfast there as well. I've been there for breakfast a couple of times. First time I've been there for lunch was over the weekend. But nice. I am looking forward to it. Let's have a sip.
Yeah, I was going to say, give us a taste. Have a swig.
Oh, man, that is nice. That does not taste like two standard drinks.
It's not.
It does not. It's like, it's a really...
We'll see you get through a couple of them during this episode then.
It's a really sweet chocolatey stout, which is really nice. The bitterness is actually not as much as I said. But yeah, it's really good.
Nice. And
would not after recommend drinking 20 of these.
Yeah, you might be in trouble. But after last week, brouhaha, so I'm sticking with the same brewery. So this week I've got the Locals Lager.
Is that in memorial for Queensland?
Shut up.
And getting absolutely thumped.
This is in preparation for our Origin victory next
week. Mate, I've got to take the wins when they come, and I know it's short-lived.
Yeah, few
you got to jump in there, right?
But after going the milk stout last week, I've gone back to my preferred beer of choice, the lager.
Nice.
So this one is brewed for the everyday beer drinker in mind. 4.2% full strength, clean, light-bodied, and still maintaining the low bitterness of a classic Queensland lager. So unlike our New South Wales opposition who are constantly bitter, we've got a nice clean lager. So nice golden colour. The head was there. It's been sitting here for a little while. And that's good. That's what I'm used to. Very classic lager. Gives me like a cleaner, lighter version of like a Great Northern, I would say. Similar taste. But shout out to Brouhaha. Those guys are great. Did me a solid when I went out and grabbed some beers out there a couple of weeks ago. So definitely be back. And same thing. They have a really big brewery with some good food and things like that. So we're going to get back out there with the family. They do some night markets out there as well. So we'll be in over the next couple of weeks, I'm sure.
I've got a question here, Andrew. On our High Habits podcast, you mentioned about running every day. How's that going for you, mate?
Define
and you
running,
even posted
really.
On the Instagram with like setting a habit, running every day, mate. I haven't seen you post since though, funnily enough. So I'm curious.
Yeah,
Can we give the listeners an update?
I like to run in
waves.
Private. So I started strong. The biggest issue with me with running every day is I'm still playing rugby, and with my body,
it's such a high level.
I'm kind of trying to get through week to week just to get through to the end of the season when I retire again. So, to be fair, the body maintenance between games each week is my priority. So, this week I've seen my physio twice and my chiro once, just to get me to about 80% to play tomorrow. So, I have not been running daily, unfortunately. I have though been running 3 times a week at rugby. If you want to count that.
Habit broken.
And I will be launching a new habit
in the off season, mate. It's all in the off season.
Called golf. That'll be my new habit, which I'll hold true to that one as long as my wife supports me financially to play that. Thank you for bringing that up, Abe.
Well, I had to, right? The listeners want to know. People have been asking me, what's Andrew doing this run?
I think you privately messaged me and said you were going to do CrossFit over in between your strength competitions.
Yeah. That was never going to happen. Absolutely not.
You look good in a bit of spandex, I reckon.
Do CrossFitters wear spandex?
I don't know. Probably.
Isn't that cycling? I think you're getting confused.
Well, I think they're the same people.
Did you get a head knock on the weekend, mate?
Are they the same people?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I think you'd look good with doing a kipping pull up.
Are you hitting on me? Is that what's happening right now?
No, I just want to see you do it.
You realise we're on a podcast, mate.
Just want to see you
Save
do
for
it.
our private calls, will you?
Let's get some Instagram footage, please. All right, let's jump in because we got to talk budgets. And to be honest,
we could just do a podcast of Andrew hitting on me.
This could be short or long. This could be short or long. Yeah. Well, someone's got to counter the bullying.
All right, learning of the week. What do you got, Andrew?
Yeah, look, I'm going to keep mine short because I've seen the podcast notes and Abe's about to give us a rundown on the Australian economy by the fucking looks of it. So my learning of the week, pretty simple, and I think I've even had this before in another episode, but it's the importance of continued internal reviews. I think the last time I spoke about it was around goals and readjusting goals, as you go through the year. But I think it's important to widen that scope of internal reviews. So, especially around now, we're middle of the year, you've knocked out the first 6 months of the year. It's a really good time to look back and reflect and readjust and get after something for the back end of the year. So, that includes things like budgeting. So, unsure your processes, Abe, but with Teamgate, as you would know, we do a budget at the start of the year. And now we're halfway through the year. I think it's a really good time to go back and review your budget, where you sort of forecasted where you're at, and then looking at your cash flow, which we're going to talk about today, and, prioritizing and even just reviewing, right? So, but since January to now, I'm sure I've added software and tools that we're now paying for that weren't in the original budget. So going back and reviewing those tools and reviewing expenses and cutting down things that we don't need, and then allocating your funds appropriately for the back end of the year. So an example there is, we've got some conferences penciled in the calendar, which is in the back end of the year in November over in the US. Obviously, that's a pretty significant investment to go over there to try to generate more customers. So going through reviewing our budget, seeing if we can cut costs anywhere between now and November to account for that extra expenditure which we're going to have. So and if we can afford it, because if we can't, then we need to have reevaluate. So reviews, go back and review, even if it's your goals, if it's your budget, go back and review the business as a whole. Either do it as a leader or do it as a team exercise and go and see where you're at personally. But also as a company. So, yeah, that's my learning of the week. What have you got from the Australian financial news?
Yes. And for anyone who's listening who's not in Australia, it's probably less relevant, some of the learnings I have, but it still provides a good picture. And hopefully some people will be interested anyway. But as far as reviewing budgets, I do mine every month. I go back and review and see where expenditure has increased or where we've actually saved money. And software reviews is sort of, every quarter, I would say that I'm looking at it, not as in-depth the start of every year, and we'll go through the budgeting process, or I guess the end of every year, the budgeting process that we use and why we do that. But we go through and look at absolutely everything and figure out what we can cut down on. But there's a lot going on in the Australian financial market at the moment that maybe not everyone's aware of. Some people will be. Do they know the full extent of it? And there's a lot of external forces that are going to start playing on businesses. And it feels like we're going to enter into a bit of a turbulent period of time with the Australian economy. So, Andrew, I know you've looked at the notes, but not to I'm not sure if you remember or you recall, but there's only two G10 countries that have both inflationary goods and services. And those two countries out of the entire G10 that have inflationary goods and services are Japan and Australia. So that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. When we're trying to curb inflation, that's a bad thing, right? And so Japan is in a bit of a different situation than what we are, is they have a very weak yen. And so the reason that their goods and services are continuing to inflate is due to just the poor performance of the yen. And so that's something that obviously there's a number of other factors that play into that, but we're not going to get into that right now, but that's a big issue. But for Australia, it's almost a bigger issue where we're just seeing continuing demand for the goods and services, right? And so obviously,
spend, right?
Yeah, continuing demand, then people can put the price up. It's all about that price elasticity. If I increase price by $10, is someone still going to pay it? Where if in Australia, yes, they are. So that's really the big thing at the moment, and that was noted by the RBA in their most recent talk they gave, where essentially demand is still high for goods and services in Australia, which is a bad thing. And who do we suspect is the problem with that? Well, it's cashed up boomers. It's not young people.
Sorry, boomers.
Yeah. It's not the young people trying to buy their first house or getting their first job. Like, don't get me wrong, they're probably some people out there buying things they shouldn't, but the majority of the time it's cashed up boomers, which is crazy to think, because a lot of these boomers who are so cashed up, they're buying houses outright in cash. So interest rates, they don't give a shit about,
aren't affecting that. Exactly.
because it doesn't bother them.
They don't have mortgages.
They don't have mortgages. That's exactly it. They paid off their mortgage a long time ago. They've sold their house for a ridiculous profit, and they're potentially downsizing or buying something, of the similar size in a different area, depending on what the case may be. But the biggest part is that they're using these big cash reserves to spend and driving up our inflationary goods and services. It's a big issue. And what that is now being linked to is that our inflation is not under control. And Michelle Bullock, Governor of RBA, has said that it's almost like we've had a pause in the war in inflation. And so there's a lot of different factors that go into this. People have started spending again because they think we're on the other side of it. House prices are going up again. But another big part of that as well is with the budget, government incentives that allow people to spend more money. The tax breaks that are coming up are likely going to result in you give money back to people, and it's going to result in the demand for goods and services to continue to go up. Like, oh great, I now save, let's just say I get an extra $200 a fortnight back from that would usually have been spent on tax, but now I've got this tax break in. I get that extra $200. What am I going to spend it on? Well, I was surviving without that $200. Am I going to save it? Probably not. Am I going to go and, spend an extra $200 on groceries, or, maybe buy some clothes that I've been putting off for a while? That's probably going to be the case. So at least initially, we'll probably see that inflationary forces come into play again, which is a big issue. And it's resulted in the RBA. I mean, they've held rates for such a long period of time now that Michelle Bullock in her last thing was like, hey, if we don't see inflation start to slow down or decrease, then we're likely going to have to increase rates again. And bear with me when I go through all this, because there's a reason why this is relevant to budgeting and forecasting. But RBA may have to raise rates again. What does that do? Any loans that you have, like home loans, personal loans, is a business. If you have business loans, you have car loans through the business. People get loans to get tools and things like that. That's all going to be affected. It's all going to increase. And if you want to get that stuff in the future, it's still going to be higher. So if they do raise those interest rates, it's going to have that effect on anyone who has a requirement to borrow cash. That's going to be an issue. But also it's going to force people to increase prices to cover the costs of those interest rates that go with it. So goods and services, once again, are probably going to have to go up until people stop paying the money, is essentially it. Another big factor in Australia at the moment is the ASX is struggling. There's more companies leaving the ASX, which is the Australian Stock Exchange. There's more companies leaving the ASX than there are coming to the ASX, which is really interesting. And one for the burrito lovers, GYG, listed on the ASX recently. It actually went really well, which is a great sign. It went up. But it's predicted to come back down. It already has started to come back down, but it's going to come back down. But, I mean, they've got they've got the McDonald's business plan. Buy property, open GYGs on that property, and the property is the asset, not the store. So that's essentially their business play, which everyone seems to like. But the thing is, it's not going to be another big player like BHP or anything, or Fortescue or anything like that. It's going to be, middle rung ASX across the board. So the ASX is still not going to improve, which means that our dollar is not going to perform as well. There's not going to be as much money circulating within the economy. And a big problem that comes with it is because of superannuation and private funds is that they're buying up all the good money-making businesses to make them money. So it's like this self-inflicted wound through super, which is, the biggest investor in the Australian economy. Now, the last point is a bit of a political point, and I don't stand on it either way. The one thing that I will say is that I want a decision one way or the other. So Australia is in a energy crisis, and for anyone who follows Punter's politics and listens to him, he's got some really good insights on it. And he's a funny guy, right? But the thing is with that is he's attacking the gas companies and the coal companies like, yeah, 100%. They're stealing cash. They should be paying more taxes. Absolutely right. But our biggest problem at the moment that I see is that we just don't have a clear policy for people to follow. And when that becomes an issue, it starts to be like, okay, well, we don't have a clear policy. We've got Peter Dutton that's now saying, hey, we need to pivot to nuclear. Renewables isn't working. And we've had like this renewables flavour for so long now to switch to nuclear, where the earliest that they've said, and this is government, by the way, so probably add 20 years on top of it. So the earliest they've said that a nuclear power plant is going to be up and running is by 2050. And so that's a big, big problem, right? Because they're already talking about energy shortages now with the gas and coal plants that is causing issues, especially on the East Coast, cold snaps, things like that. They're talking about gas shortages. Now everyone will say, but we export so much gas, so blah, blah, blah. It's because the gas and the coal companies don't give a shit about the lasting relationships. Yeah. Because we need it. We're a prisoner to them. And they are on the side of, if the government's not going to regulate us, that's fine. We're going to take full advantage of it because we need to make money, because eventually people are going to start turning off these services because they're already looking at alternative means. And so what that means is that there's been no new gas and coal projects that have gone forward in Australia since this renewables push, because I think like the average return on like a coal station, like to get a return on investment takes like 20 years. And they don't want to build a new coal station because 20 years' time, it may not actually be a thing, right? So that's a real big concern for them. Now, the problem with Dutto pushing nuclear is that it just creates this big problem now between, well, if the coalition wins the next election, do they go nuclear, throw these renewables out? What happens to all the businesses that are based around Australia's renewable push? They now fall over. How do we, stand up this nuclear capability? Like, man, it is just like absolute turmoil for a lot of businesses out there. And it could result in some pretty, catastrophic events that occur across Australia, because they're two very, very distinct differences where Albanese and Labor are pushing renewables and for Australians to create renewables, creating jobs and opportunities, whereas Dutto and the coalition, well, some of the coalition anyway, there's a few people who don't agree with it, have gone across this nuclear path. So really it's just a matter of like we just got to figure out a policy to move forward with. And why I had this big rant about all this different stuff that's happening in the Australian sort of economy and things that are going to affect us is because I wanted to highlight the fact that we are not out of the woods yet from COVID. And I just said, the word. But we're not out of the woods yet from all the spending that happened, the economic turmoil that went through and things like that come from it. We're very much still in it. America's sort of coming out the other side. We're still seeing inflation too high. Our dollar's not performing well. Our goods and services are inflationary. The RBA is talking about rate rises if it's not under control. The ASX is struggling. And we've got now this policy issue of energy, which is going to affect businesses. And why it's important is that if you don't have positive cash flow, or at least good cash flow, if you take on too much debt than what your company can handle in bad times, then your company's not going to perform well. It's probably going to go bankrupt and have to close. And if you look at your cash forecasts and determine different scenarios of what could happen, then you need to make sure that you're set for the worst case. And when the whole economic shutdown that happened, the first thing that we did as a organization was, let's do worst case scenario planning. And so we planned for drops in revenue of 20-30% if we had, we saw wide closures and things like that of companies. And it was like, okay, well, how do we sustain ourselves during this time if that happens? So I think it's a really, really big thing that people need to start thinking about is budgets. And the amount of people that I talk to who goes, my accountant deals with that. It's like, no, your accountant reconciles your spending.
Your books.
The accountant doesn't plan. The accountant doesn't plan how you're going to spend your money to grow your business and have an effect on how you operate as a business. They'll tell you oh yeah, there's money in the bank account. Go spend it, Andrew. And you go, okay, cool. You go spend the money, and they're like, oh, there's no money in the bank account. Well, what happened to it all? You spent it. But how do I pay this bill? Well, you probably shouldn't have spent that money. That's not their job unless you hire someone specifically to do budgets. But then it's like a collaborative process because we're getting into segment 2, which we'll get to. But all those economic factors are extremely important because they affect your business and could potentially have an effect in the near term of performance and cash flow.
Yeah, and I think that ties in really well with
forecasting,
right? So it's good to do your budget. It's really important to do cash flow, but I think that extra step, which a lot of people probably miss, is the scenario planning. So best case, worst case scenarios. So even for a smaller business that's planning on growing, what does that growth look like? What does that, if you're hitting your growth milestones, what does that look like expansion wise? Like triggers for hiring, triggers for allocating resources. But then on the flip side, going that worst case, if we have another rate rise and your expenses increase by 10%, what does that look like for your cash flow? And do you need to save money? Do you have money? What does that look like? So, yeah, which we'll dive deeper into as we go through.
Yeah. So that all leads into my quote of the week by Michael Porter. So anyone who's done any sort of business studies would have heard of Michael Porter. Very, very famous guy, especially in the US with business strategies. But this quote is, if your goal is anything but profitability, if it's to be big or to grow fast or to become a technology leader, you'll hit problems. And man, we have seen that time and time again, especially in our space, where profitability wasn't important. It was just about being the biggest, growing fast, becoming a technology leader. That's like SaaS in a nutshell. Yeah. You're get big, grow fast, and be a technology leader. They want all three of those things, right? Not just one. They want all three of those things. And you're going to hit problems. And it's well, layoffs occurred. SaaS businesses shut down all the time. It's just because no one's focused on profitability. It's all about grow bigger, grow faster, have better tech.
Yeah, exactly. You see all these $1 million companies. It's they're doing millions, but they're profiting nothing or they're in debt. But yeah, cool. My quote of the week is not related to budgeting. It is, as I grow older, I pay less attention to what men say. I simply watch what they do. And it's by Andrew Carnegie. And I made a joke to Abe before we jumped on the podcast that it was related to my employees. I put some pretty strict
that wasn't a joke, Andrew,
around my employees, Q3. But I think the quote more relates to leaders, right? If you're going to put strict goals on your employees, be prepared to, get your feet and your hands dirty, right? And it relates back to our time in the military. A lot of the soldiers, have an opinion on officers, and the officers that generally have the better reputations are the ones that are happy to say, "Hey, follow me, let's go," and lead by example. So it's the same thing. I've put some strict goals around my team, but in the same breath, I've put the same goals around myself, and I've given them access to my goals and my OKRs for Q3 and my performance. So at any stage, if they're doing something, they can jump into my goals and see exactly what I'm doing as well. So that transparency, I think, is key, especially in a small team. I've got a pretty small team, so it's easy to be a passenger in a big team. I think in a small team, every effort counts. So really important for us moving forward into this back end of the year. So
yeah, I think in a big team, it's very easy for people to say, "Oh, I don't have enough people to achieve that task," and it's like, "Oh, well, just hire more people then." You go, "Okay," and the manager's not doing anything except holding useless meetings and saying like, "Andrew, have you done this yet?" "No." "Well, why haven't you done it yet?" Those are the sorts of interactions that happen. But I think that's a really, really big part of life. And I don't think it's, leading, managing business and stuff like that. Like, it's a good life lesson as well. Like, you think about your kids, right? If you're lazy, you're not sticking to a habit and running every day, I mean, what sort of message does that send to you? But it's, it's 100% true, especially since
I run after my kids every day.
Yeah. I got myself a powerlifting coach and a nutritionist, right? And since then I've been, eating really great foods, pretty strict on, what I eat the entire time. And I feel like that's passed on to my son, my middle son, where he's now questioning, is that healthy? No, that's not healthy. This is why. And he's like, "Oh, I don't want that then." And so it just goes to show like that flow of how people mimic you, and by doing things, it shows more than by saying things. If I was to say, "Oh, don't eat that, that's unhealthy," but then I eat it as well,
then you're eating it.
Then it's like, well, it doesn't matter. Unhealthy is just a word. It doesn't mean anything, right? And so then it like sparked this whole conversation about protein, carbohydrates, fats, and what makes a good meal, and vegetables, and all that sort of stuff, right? So I think it goes like just outside of work, it goes towards life. If you don't follow through with your words, like if you say to someone, "Yep, we'll catch up this weekend, we'll go for a beer," and then you flake on them, you do it once, you do it twice, and then you're just going to stop, getting asked to go for beers or whatever, right? So it's just, being that person who follows through with their word is extremely important.
Yeah, definitely. So should we jump in? Budgeting and cash flow.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's not a sexy topic, but as always, we'll define what a budget is first, and our definitions may differ, but for me, it's a planning tool, right? So it's a planning tool. It's obviously broken down into revenue or expected revenue, and then expenses. Generally, most budgets will be broken into those two, and then you've obviously got profit. So for me, it's a tool to plan. So I usually do a budget at the start of the year, and that budget is used to plan, to allocate resources, and then also control expenses. So my expenses start to increase month over month, and I'm reviewing it month over month. Then I need to start to look at why, and if those expenses are actually resulting in anything. Obviously, if my expenses are, Google ads or something like that, and I'm seeing an ROI or I'm seeing an increase in customers and revenue, then that's acceptable. But if not, you need to review it. So yeah, for me, it's a planning tool, and it's used to then, it's great to make the plan, but you've got to revisit it to make sure you've got everything under control.
Yeah, mine's really not too dissimilar to that. It's a forecast of revenue and expenditure that you utilize to plan the allocation of resources. That's essentially what it is, right? And I think that's just like a less words, same thing. And for me, I mean, we both are from the same school on budgeting, right? And
School of Hard Knocks.
Yeah, mate, yeah. But, doing it at the start of the year. And I think it's important to note, right, is that the reason that we do it at the start of the year is because we run off US tax time, which is January through December. But if you're in Australia, it might make more sense to do it for tax cycles. But it just depends how you think, right? If you want to take it January to December, great. Do that. Do what's easiest. Biggest thing is that if your budget is too hard, too complex, you're not going to do it. And I think that's where, you look at stories of the barefoot investor, right? How he simplified things so people, made it easy, and then people were able to crawl themselves out of it. It's like you hear some of the customer stories or the transformations. I guess it's pretty crazy to hear some of the amounts of debt that people are in, bad debt like credit card debt that they're able to claw their way out of using like a pretty simple method. And I think that's a big part of it as well. Is that simplicity is important, but what's not a budget is probably a good thing to look at as well. Like we give a description of, what is a budget, what's a definition, but what's not a budget? It's your bookkeeper doesn't budget unless there's like a specific function where they offer you like a service to do budgets, to budget out the year. And one thing I would be very wary of is if your bookkeeper or accountant says, oh, I'll do up a budget for the year, and they don't ask you things like, what are your goals? What events do you have? Where do you want to spend your money? What's your growth aspirations for your company? What's important to you? Then it's not a budget. It's just a fact sheet from
like a plan
what you spent last year.
Yeah.
Right?
It's expenditure
that's
plan.
all it really is. It's an expenditure plan, right? It's not a budget. And so a budget is more than just, okay, well, here's what I spent last year. I'm going to spend the same this year. That's not a budget. So I think that's a very important thing to do. To know. And then a budget is also not reports from zero. When you ask someone, oh, do you do a budget? And they go, oh, yeah, I can just look it up in Xero. Xero doesn't do budgeting. It's an accounting software. It does reconciliation of purchases and revenue and will give you the historic vision of what you've spent your money on, but it doesn't tell you where you're going to or where you should spend your money on.
Yeah. And of course, like Xero and QuickBooks and these finance tools, they will help you budget. They'll definitely,
absolutely.
And they'll help you stick to a budget and reconcile monthly.
Essential part of the budget process.
Not a budget. Yeah, a budget should be you sitting down, planning, and going through, what your year looks like and what those potential expenditures and revenue forecasts and growth goals and that sort of stuff should all tie in to your budget. And it's funny, like we're going to talk business today, but like all of this stuff still applies to individuals. Like if you're doing an individual budget, if you're saving for a house, sit down and look at your expenses and look at your wage and your projected wages through the year and where you can make extra money and where you can save extra money and that sort of stuff. It's all applicable, whether you're an individual or a business. So, yeah. All right, types of budgets. Now,
so there's five types. Okay. Well, yeah, there's way more, but I mean, we've sort of got it down to five types of budgets.
We'll talk about five.
And the last one that we're going to hit is the one that Andrew and I use, and it's the one it's actually the one I use personally, and I'm probably going to do it this weekend because it's start of a new tax year. The one I use personally, but also the one that we use in business, because I think it's the most effective one to make sure that you are cutting away crap is probably the best way to put it.
You get the most juice, right? Like you squeeze the most out of everything and we're talking about zero-based budget, which
this is a bad habit breaker. This is a bad habit breaker, in my opinion. When we talk about habits, it's like, this is a good way to have a bad habit breaker. But
it's like a habit audit,
focus on that.
But it's a financial audit.
Yes. But let's look at the first one, which is like a habit keeper, the incremental budget. So this is I'd say this is probably the simplest way to do a budget with the least amount of thought that goes in it. titled the incremental budget. So adjust the current year's budget by adding or subtracting small amounts for the next year. So this is like, things are probably going to inflate by 4% over the next year. So I'll just inflate everything by 4%. And you can also look at changes in costs or new projects. But it's really bad because I say this is like the habit keeper. Because if you have, you look at a personal sense, like if you have all these like Netflix subscriptions and random subscriptions that are on there, you're not going to go and review, should I have these? It's just like, just add them on to next year. But if you're a business and you look at it and say, we spend X amount of dollars on building supplies, cleaning products, on wages, those sorts of things, you sit there and you're not looking for how could we reduce those overheads or how could we increase our profit margins. You're just saying that I accept the status quo and we're just going to go with this. And that's where you fall into that danger with that incremental budget, is that your inefficiencies are just going to carry through year over year every time you do it.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll jump into the next two because I have no idea what the fourth one is. But activity-based budgeting. So this, as the name suggests, is budgeting around allocating funds based on specific activities that are necessary for achieving goals. So to give a clear example, Teamgate's main strategic goal for this year is growth. We want growth. We want to expand into the US market from being a predominantly US-based company, Europe-based company. So a lot of our growth efforts have been based on activities in the US. So like I said in my learning of the week, we have some conferences planned for Q4 over in the US. So this would be, looking at our budget and looking at that activity-based things that we want to achieve that will contribute to our growth in the US, and then budgeting for that activity. So if that means reducing spend in marketing over the next 4 months so that we can afford to get across to the US in November and attend those conferences, and that would be what it looks like for an activity-based budget. So, the way I would execute this is obviously plan your year out, plan out when those key milestones are or key activities that you want to attend. Look at the expenditure for those, and then work backwards to work out your budget for the remainder of the year. And obviously, if you can't attend those or you can't afford all of them, then you need to reassess as you go through. Anything to add to activity based?
No, I think that's pretty. It's pretty spot on. The only thing I'd say is that potentially what you could look on activity based, when you look at like builders and things like that, they'll often have to have a big outlay for buying a property to then build and then sell on, like developmental builders, right? People build houses to sell them on. And there's a few guys in Bathurst that I knew that did this. And one of the big issues is having that cash up front. So that's where your activity base, if you know that, hey, this new development lot's going to become available in, let's just say, February of next year, I need to make sure that I have sufficient cash to either get financing to get that plot of land and the building materials, obviously, that go with it. But I need to be able to finance that project. So I need to make sure that I have money in the bank to finance that project. And I think that's a very important case when you look at, the activity-based budgeting, is when you've got, like for you, it's conferences, which is a big outlay for a SaaS company because, people moving across the globe to get to this location, accommodation, the booths, all that kind of stuff is expensive. But for builders, it's big projects. Or if you're an electrician and you've got a commercial fit out coming up and that the payment terms are net 90, then you've got to make sure that you've got the money to outlay for the products you need to get to that point.
Yeah, and probably the downside of the activity-based budgeting is the complexity, right? And like I said, I think the best way to execute it is to work out those activities early and mark them in the diary or the calendar, and then write that expense off and work backwards. So if you need X amount of dollars in November, work take that out of the books and work out what you've got left and how you can reallocate that to make it work, or if you can make it work. So that's activity-based budgeting. The next one is value proposition budgeting. So think very similar, but it's going to be based on what is the value of the expense bring to your company. So if I'm spending $5,000 a month on Google Ads and I'm getting no return, is it worth it? If I'm increasing my brand equity, but I'm not getting any new customers, is it worth it? So for me, for example, the conference we went to in San Francisco was a great event. Good to get together with the team. We had some goals allocated to that conference. It was a pretty big outlay, and we didn't get the return on investment. So, if that expense was to come up next year, would I reinvest in that expense? Probably not, because the value just wasn't there. And for us, generally we break down our expenses into buckets. So sales, marketing, and development. For us, our strategic intent is to grow. We're a sales-based company. So, if we were product-led, we'd probably have more of a focus on marketing. But, the way we sell and the way we get customers is having that human interaction. So, of course, I'm going to have more expenses in the sales department. So, generally, we like to balance those three buckets. But for us, and, each business is going to be different, work out what that value is that you're going to get out of that expense. So, Google Ads is always a really good example, because some customers, in a niche environment where they're not competing with big names, will get massive return on investment through things like Google Ads. For me, who's competing with the big, Salesforce, HubSpots of the world, I just don't get that return. So for me, that's not a viable, method, and it's not a viable expense because I'm not getting the value back.
Yep. And the way I look at the value-based budget, the value proposition budgeting, is this is really for like larger teams that are coming together, where you might have different departments that you're looking at, and so you can start to rank. But there's like limited budget, and you start to rank the priorities of, we want to build this, or we want to go to this conference, we want to do this, but we've only been allocated, $100,000 in our budget. So let's put them in priority order. And once that 100K is filled, the rest gets scrapped. Yep. We can request more budget, and if we get more budget, we'll put it in for this specific item. But now we look at, it's almost like you're just doing a value matrix for the things that you want to do, or the things that people want to do, and going through and talking about what value it is actually going to bring to the company, which is different when we look at the driver-based budgeting. So this is the one that you said you're not overly familiar with. So driver-based budgeting is looking at the key business outcomes that are to be achieved, such as, we want to release this new product to expand into this new market. And so you look at the business drivers that are going to go towards that. So it allows you to get that strategic alignment from everyone on the team where, all right, we're resourcing budget towards product development for this specific product. We're looking at marketing spend towards this specific product, because this is the business path that we want to go through to achieve our goals at the end. And so it's now more allocating towards, you might have a number of different departments. When you look at a company like HubSpot, you've got HubSpot CRM, you've got HubSpot CMS, you've got your HubSpot support tools, you've got the endless amount of different HubSpot areas in there. One of the business drivers that they might have is they might want to release a metrics monitoring for, like just to say they wanted to copy bare metrics or buy bare metrics. A driver-based budget would be, okay, well, we are going to develop this from scratch. Here's the funds that we've allocated towards this to achieve it. Marketing, sales that's going to go towards it, and team that's going to be put into that case. So once again, it's a very much a bigger organization tool, but still something that, that can be used across. But I wouldn't really recommend it for a small business overall.
Yeah.
And then the next one, which is our favorite, our little cherry on top, the zero-based budget. Hey, so what this actually entails is just deleting everything out of your budget and then just starting again. And essentially, nothing is a guaranteed to be on the table. And this is where you need to have either, if you're doing it independently, you're doing it by yourself, which I do because Geordie, my wife, doesn't care about finances. She just cares that she has enough money to buy things.
Just give me money, yeah.
So in our relationship, when I look at the personal side, it's like, all right, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to do this zero-based budget, and I'm doing it independently. And so I now need to be ruthless with what I consider to be essential and non-essential. And everything's on the table to get cut off. And so I look at it, and we actually, when I did this the first time, that's when I got rid of all my subscriptions, because I had all these, I had like, what is it? I can't remember. Audible, had like Spotify, had Netflix, had Stan, like had all these subscription services. And I'm like, nah, that's it. We're cutting some of these out, if not all of them out. And I had, I went back to Geordie. I said, this is what we're going to get rid of all this. And she's like, she then has to say, no, that's a bit silly. We're going to keep this and this. And then you have that robust discussion about, okay, well, why do we need that? Yep, okay, we listen to music all the time. We should probably not be tight asses and not have the Spotify free and get ads. So we'll get the Spotify premium family, right? And so that's what I'm talking about. And when you're a business, it's starting from that scratch of, well, we currently pay X amount of dollars for a, let's just say for me, we had a company called Chorus, which did call recording, and it ended up being a ridiculous expense and super expensive. And so we went, well, we need call recording, but we don't need this call recording because this is so expensive. So let's look at alternatives. And I think Andrew was the one that, were you the one that found it? No, actually,
Yeah,
you were the one that found it. Yeah, Grain. So Andrew found Grain, which was like, I don't know, 10% of the cost a month, maybe, if not less.
Yep.
And it does a perfect job as a replacement for Chorus. And so now it's like, great, flick that to the curb, cut that expense down. And so if it is something that is essential to your business, you don't have to cut it out completely. You can just say, we need to find an alternative because this is ridiculous. I don't want to pay that amount of money.
It's like CRMs, right? There's plenty of alternatives there, lower cost. If you're a
Always
Salesforce user, come and talk to me. Come talk to me. But no,
like zero, hit me up, son.
Zero-based budgets. Obviously, we use them, but I think a real life example recently. I was talking to my sister-in-law, who is her and her partner live together. They're starting to save for a house at the moment, and they still have separate finances. Which I said straight away, you need to sort that out. But their big plan was, every pay we're going to put in $200 each into this joint account, and that's what's going to save for a house. And I said, well, why? How'd you land on 200? It's like, that's just a good amount. It's like, have you done any sort of like? We
decided that $200 was.
If you flipped it and you did like my wife does every month, my wife calculates our bills that are coming out that month, and to the dollar, and the rest gets transferred straight into our savings account. And then it's like a game of Survivor. So I live like I'm poor. I'm not poor. I earn good money. My wife earned good money, but we just live like we're on Survivor. That's kind of there's probably a balance in there that
she's like the Amazon delivery driver's best friend.
Yeah. We won't talk about her buy now, pay later.
Are you okay, mate?
Habits.
Do you need assistance?
Her buy now, pay later habits. But our Survivor monthly is it, and like I said to my sister-in-law, you could be saving a lot quicker and saving a lot more and buying that house a lot quicker if you did the reverse and worked out all your bills and worked out what you could actually put away each fortnight or month or whatever it is, instead of just picking a number that's going to be comfortable, and then you've got an extra couple of hundred in your allowance to go buy clothes, per month or whatever it is. So, zero-based budget is great.
This also goes to, and we put it in the business perspective, like 100% look at that. But then it's like, and this sounds very inhumane, right? But as a business owner, it's a key factor, is you got to look at employees as well. So don't just think about software. You got to look at employees and go, holy shit, I actually can't afford this person. And it's either that they've become like employees outgrow you. That's a nature, like if you're doing a good job as a manager and a leader, your employees are going to outgrow you because they're going to develop skills that are wanted elsewhere. And you either have the money to pay them appropriately or you don't. And if you don't, they'll move on, they'll get another job, and you say, great, I'm glad that I could help you. I'm going to go hire the next one, and we'll train them up until they leave. And that's just a circle of life, right? And I think that's a very key bit is you need to look at, and a lot of the software companies that we come across, the biggest expense that they have on their balance sheet is these wages. And they're paying these people ludicrous amounts of money, and they're not actually doing that much. But
that's the bigger thing. Yeah. They've got 20 or 30 people on the books, and we come in and strip that team down to 4 or 5, and you achieve the same amount of work, which is crazy. And flip side, like I mentioned at the start of the podcast, is knowing when to hire. So if you're growing at a specific rate, you got the cash flow. What does that next trigger look like as you're growing? How do you expand your business? And if we go back to like COVID, when all the SaaS companies had a massive tech boom, they overhired. So they went, we're growing at this exorbitant amount. They didn't hit their, they just expected to keep growing, hired hundreds and hundreds of people, and then companies like Salesforce lay off hundreds of people because
it's
they
crazy,
want to maintain
right? Someone gets hired
margins.
3 weeks later, they're like, "You're fired."
Yeah.
Why?
It's unfair. It's unfair to the employee. So as a leader, you need to be budgeting, you need to be forecasting to save that heartache in the future.
Yeah. But I think it's a good point to bring up the zero-based budgets. Everything is on the table. So you need to look and you need to be honest with yourself. Are you profitable? Do you have the runway? Are you generating enough cash for your business? If not, you need to say, hey, I need to get rid of one employee so I can maintain the business and not shut down. Because at the end of the day, you either get rid of that one employee or you end up having to get rid of all your employees. So and this is the crazy thing. We've talked to founders who are there and they're like, hey, but if you just fired like 3 of these people, you'd be profitable and you wouldn't have to sell. Like you wouldn't be running out of money. And then just be like, I can't do that. I can't fire them.
Yeah.
What do you mean you can't fire them? Like I just need to get more money from somewhere. It's like, mate, it's not just magically going to come from somewhere. And in tech, it obviously does because you just get all these VCs that just throw money at companies on an idea. But that's the sort of mentality that people have. And it's like with a zero-based budget, you need to go back to like, how much can I afford in wages? And you might find to yourself like, damn, I've overhired, or I can't hire anyone else because otherwise, I'm not going to be profitable. And building out that whole process and that forecast. But let's, we talked about the different types of budgets. So incremental budget, which is like you're going to inherit bad practices. They're going to come across, easiest one to do, not very challenging towards making sure that you remain profitable. Activity-based, looking at, big activities that might be coming up and basing your budget expenditure surrounding that. Conferences, buying land to build houses on. Value proposition budgeting, so looking at what's actually going to drive value within the organization. The driver-based budgeting, so initiatives that the company wants to do to align people strategically towards those goals, allocating resources towards it. And then a zero-based budget, our favorite one, which essentially allows you to start from scratch, get rid of all those bad habits and say, we are now starting fresh, here we go. So let's look at budget categories. And this is it's a really different, it's a really interesting one because most of the time with small businesses, especially, your accountant will have a set categories that'll be there. And I'd probably say just use them because it's going to save you a shitload of time, because I've been in companies where the categories that the accountant uses in Xero don't match the categories of the budget. And it just sucks because you have to sit there and like manually do all the math for it. Takes too much time and it makes it too much of a chore. So if your accountant uses them, just get those in, use them for your budget, and then just plan off those, right? As long as you know and understand what those categories are, that's the main thing. But an example of what we use for SaaS is what we're going to give today. So budget categories. So the first one I'm going to talk about is revenue, right? So this is money coming into the company. Now, for us in the SaaS industry, we like to have recurring revenue. And so this is essentially people sign an annual contract or they pay month to month, whatever the case may be, but there's regular income that's coming in from these customers, and that's called monthly recurring revenue or annual recurring revenue. And so what we generally do is break it down into monthly recurring revenue, so we understand each month how much money is coming into the business, so we can, allocate funds appropriately. And then we've got our professional services fees or consulting fees that go in there as well. So these are generally like one-off payments. So if you're building out some sort of custom integration, or if you're Andrew, you're helping someone set up their sales pipeline, they're doing that sales consulting as part of the service that he offers, training on the platform to employees, that could be a one-off consulting fee. And then there's partnership revenue. So if you have a good partnership channel, you might get paid money for referring people to some of your partners. So it's usually like a 20% cut of the monthly revenue goes to you. So that could be another source of revenue. Those are really like three main sources of revenue where you see money coming into the business. And depending on what industry you're in, that'll change. Like very few small businesses have recurring revenue that occurs. It's usually just you might have regular clients, but I wouldn't say they're recurring revenue. Some people who do like commercial work, so there might be ongoing fees that could come with like a commercial cleaning contract where every week, every night, every day you clean a building for like a dentist, doctor type thing. That's more commercial side. That could be considered recurring, but the majority of the time it'd just be one-off fees. Anything I missed there with revenue?
Nah, I guess just to keep it really, really simple, it's just money in before expenses, right? So any way that you're generating revenue before those expenses start to come out. So that's your revenue. Obviously, next is expenses. So these are your outgoings. So this is going to differ depending on the company or the industry that you're in. So we can give a SaaS example, but it's obviously going to be expenses around your different departments. So whether that's wages. So for us in SaaS, it's around that sales, marketing, support, and engineering, and probably customer success. You'll have your general expenses. So for SaaS, it's going to be the stuff that's going to keep you up, whether that's software, tools that you use. But for like a brick and mortar, that's going to be your office rent, your utilities, your administration or
manufacturing costs if you make stuff yourself.
Your cost, and that goes back to like your cost of goods sold as well. So manufacturing, and you look at profit margins and things like that. So revenue, which we already spoke about. So money in, expenses is obviously money out, and then finally we talk profit. So that's obviously
it's called profit
or loss.
It's not called loss. No, it's not called loss. It's just like profit. It'll either be positive or negative, right?
Positive or
if it's
negative,
positive, you make a profit. If it's a loss, if it's negative, you're in bad territory. The reason they call it profit is because you're not meant to make a loss.
You're not meant to lose.
Is the big thing. Yeah. You're not meant to make a loss. You're meant to make a profit.
Obviously, the calculation, the ideal calculation is your revenue exceeds your expenses. So that puts you in profit. So this is going to be an indication of your financial health and also the sustainability of your business. So it's good to forecast out. We budget month to month, but we also do that for the whole year, and then we forecast for the whole year, but then we reconcile at the end of each month to see how far off we were from that forecast. But it also helps to look at the sustainability into the future. If you've had 1 month where your expenses are bloated, do you have the cash flow to sustain into the future? So, profit is determined by your revenue and your expenses, which are the three general
revenue minus expenses.
Of your budget.
So you either make money or you don't. It's pretty simple, right? If it's positive, you're making money. If it's negative, then you're losing money. And so you want to avoid those negative months as much as possible. Otherwise, your business is not going to be around for long. But I think that's a pretty basic explanation. And probably the biggest thing is with the expenses, as I said, just keep the categories what your accountant uses or what's in zero, because it'll just save you a lot of trouble when you try to reconcile it.
Yeah.
Which brings on to the next point, forecast versus actuals. So I do my budget every month because our books are reconciled or closed every month. And so what does reconciled mean? It essentially just means that you are just confirming the expenses or the profit. You're essentially confirming the transactions on your account. And you do this first within Xero to make sure that they're in like the correct category, the amounts are right, the date paid was right, all those sorts of things are in there correctly, and the hygiene is good. And then you take that out of Xero or QuickBooks, whatever you're using, and then you put it into your budget sheet and you track, did it match up with my forecasted expectations of what I was going to spend? And so this is where your forecast versus actuals come up. And so you need to make sure that you check this diligently, because you start a zero-based budget or you do your incremental budget, whatever you're going to do, right? And you might find that you are underspending significantly and there's an opportunity there to, or your profit is higher than expected, there's an opportunity to do expansion. You might have hit a trigger to expand. You might be underspending on certain items and you might need to check why, because there might be a reason behind that maybe not so good. But it also could be because you're, great at finding bargains or something like that, right? But then on the other side, if you're overspending, you then need to start interrogating your budget and saying, what have I got wrong? Because you've got something wrong. And you need to go back and potentially need to revisit your whole budget and redo your forecasts and cash flows and say, oh, holy shit, I'm actually expected to run at a net negative this year, which is not good because I'm going to run out of money. So it's important. That's why it's important to have your finger on the pulse here, so you can, have those near real time, updates of how your spending is going and is it on track for what you are expecting. And that sort of brings in the next point, is how often should I reconcile? You should reconcile whenever the books are ready, is my opinion. And if you're paying someone, a bookkeeper, to do your books, I would say to them, at the latest mid-month, you should have your
previous
books
month
reconciled.
Ready to go.
Yeah, for the previous month. So in 10 days, it's going to be the 15th of July. This is when we're recording at 5th of July. I would expect June books to be closed by the 15th of July. And if it's not, I'd be hounding my bookkeeper to get those books closed.
Yeah, definitely. I think a handy tool, and we'll talk about tools soon, but having it, listed in like a Google sheet where you can compare.
No, there's the first tool. We don't need to talk about that anymore.
Xero does a really good job where you can, when you run that report, you'll have your expenses breakdown and your profitability breakdown month to month. So you can actually see right next to each other, hey, my marketing expenses for June were $4,000, but for July they were $10,000. And then you can investigate and get after that. Oh my God,
my Google Ads has run away.
Yeah, so it's a good way to just check yourself and check where you're at. So if you've been pretty consistent around expenses and then you bloat one month, why? Investigate that further. If you're underspending, like you said, Abe, you can identify.
Especially if you have a marketing rep, is a big one, because if you have a marketing rep that's in charge of like Google ad spend and stuff like that,
what's going on?
I've seen some pretty horrendous results of unchecked Google ad spend, and that's why. Yes, you reconcile your budget monthly, but you also need to keep track of things like expenses overall, as you go week to week, because you can get a good forecast of how much you're going to spend in a month. Like if you've already spent your budget and it's week 1 of the month, then you probably need to go, hey, what's going on here? Because Google doesn't care. They'll take your money. You're not going to get refunded.
They'll take it. Agencies will take your money as well. Yeah. Make sure you're comparing month to month. Obviously, that's the whole point of a budget. Compare your forecast to your actuals. So if you forecasted to spend $2,000 on Google Ads and you spent $5,000, why? Did it result in anything? Is there an opportunity there to further explore, or did you just spend extra money for no reason? So yeah, that's forecast versus actuals. Cash flow calculation. So cash flow versus profit is probably a really big thing to understand, especially for us in the SaaS space. It's probably more important because we're talking about subscription revenue where you're receiving money every month, but then you have annual revenue, so you're going to have big cash injections. So an example, Teamgate receives 50% of our customers pay month to month, the other 50 pay annually, but most of them pay in January. So my cash flow in January is massively bloated. So I need to make that cash last throughout the year. So a lot of mistakes that companies make, well, they'll receive a massive influx of cash in a certain month or at certain points throughout the year. They'll spend that, but they won't actually account for the cash flow that money was actually meant to last for a certain amount of time. So, if we look at like a trade business, this might mean that you've done X amount of business in June. You might have invoiced for $30,000 in June, but you've got, accounts receivable. You've got people that have paid down payments but haven't paid the full amount. You might have people that are on payment plans that are paying you over a certain amount. So that's going to impact your cash flow. You're not going to have that $30,000 on, the 30th of June. It's going to come in, trickle in throughout whatever period your payment plan is or whatever those payment policies are. So understanding what that cash looks like throughout the year. And, if there's certain months where you're, in the red, for example, then you need to plan to account for that as you go through. Anything else?
So I use this cash flow calculator that runs off my budget that'll essentially auto update and show me if I'm going to run out of cash or how much I'm going to be in the positive. And that also allows you then to start scenario planning. If you have, a big churn or a down revenue month, then you can start to go, oh, have I still got enough cash quite easily without having to go through any lengthy calculations. But the biggest thing there is that you need to understand if you are in a seasonal business, are you going to have enough money to see you through the down season is a big thing. And like farmers, they're probably the worst example of poor cash flow because they pretty much make all of their money in a month. Majority, like if you're solely in the business of like grains and harvesting, you make all your money in a month. That's essentially it, is that you get your crops off, you sell your crops to market. Or if you've got grain storage, then sometimes you can hold it for a while and sell it when market conditions improve. But the majority of people, it's like straight on the truck and off they go. Let's see how much money we got. And then it's like, great, we've got, this $1 million that's sitting in the bank now, but we now need to spread it out over 12 months until we get that next year. What if we had a bad season? And so if you're a farmer, you need to start looking at planning out like years in advance, because if you hit a drought for like 2 years, are you going to have enough cash flow to get through that 2-year drought? That's a really, really big thing. And so you need to look at those external factors that come into it. And this links back to these market conditions that we're seeing now, is that you need to understand the fact that, are you going to have enough cash flow? Let's just say what happened in 2020 with the shutdown, where all the shops shut. How many businesses just had to shut down because they ran out of cash, versus the ones that were healthy with their cash flow and their margins, who had enough cash reserves to pay wages, keep the lights on, and continue through that. So it's really important that you understand and keep a healthy cash flow, positive profit business, and have that money stored away for a rainy day, particularly if there's some sort of economic disaster that occurs, or potentially there's some sort of big outlay that needs to occur as a part of that as well.
Yeah, and I think another good example is how many building businesses have gone under over the last couple of years, right? And yes, of course, some of those are dodgy and just managed poorly, but so many developers that have taken deposits on more jobs than they can handle. There's
been so many that have gone out of business that you can't say it was just solely because they were bad at business.
Yeah.
Biggest...
They've taken all this cash, all of these deposits, and then because building costs went through the roof, they probably spent that cash on buying new development, and they've all gone under. Just crazy times. But again, it comes back to that, if they were doing one job at a time, or they took that money, bought the resources, and continued with the build, then they'd they'd probably still be around. But
I think like, how bad has it gotten since then though? Now, like, you try and find a builder and they're just not like. It's not the fact that we don't have like. Yes, okay, there is like a builder shortage, right? But on the other side of that as well is that they're so busy because people are spending, and their books are so overrun that they're taking things that are a year out to get work done.
Yep.
Man, like people need to be careful because
very careful. Yeah,
a lot of things can happen.
A lot of friends that have just been burned, or they sign an initial contract, and the total cost has gone up like 30%, and the builder's like, well, you can either pay it or I'm going to walk away.
Another example of that, and this is before 2020, is that Townsville floods.
Yeah.
So Townsville floods, when they happened, I knew a few blokes who were builders, and they got absolutely destroyed in Townsville floods, and it was because they had like builds that they were doing for people. They could no longer get labour, and when they needed like sparkies or plumbers to come in and do stuff, they were like, "Oh, great, price has our like hourly rate has tripled or quadrupled." And they're like, "What do you mean?" It's like, "Oh, well, like I've got more work that I could possibly do."
Yeah.
And insurance companies are willing to pay whatever I tell them. So pay it or don't. I don't care. And he's like, "Well, that just completely screws me." And like these builders had to go back to working for a building company instead of being independent, while also trying to honour their builds that they already had. Some people didn't, but other people, tried to do it. But it's just an example of how like things can go on their head overnight.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's wrap it up with the last topic, and it's tools to help budget. And I already touched on the first one, which is a Google Sheet. Obviously, Google Sheets are a relatively simple way to budget. So building out, and for anyone listening, if you want a template, feel free to reach out to us on Instagram or any of our socials, and happy to provide a zero-based budget template that we use. We can send that through to you. But
we're happy to help out as well if you're like, hey, I want to do a budget. But all the stuff that you were talking about, just like, then hit us up on Instagram, and we'll look to help you out.
Yeah, and it's a good way to manage and reconcile that month to month is Google Sheets. Like I said, if you've got it, vertically, you can easily compare and see month to month. You create tables, reports, whatever you want to do. But the reason I think Google Sheets is so important is, as we talk about these other tools, everything generally comes back to a Google Sheet. So their metrics, which we're going to talk about, generally you're going to upload your Google Sheet or link your Xero account or your QuickBooks account or whatever finance tool you're using. So I think at a minimum, if you're doing nothing at the moment, start with a Google Sheet, and then we can start to expand to these other tools that are out there. They're going to make your life a little bit easier. Bear Metrics is another one, and I'll let you talk about it as well, Abe, because we've both used Bear Metrics in the past. So Bear Metrics is a SaaS. It is a SaaS, primarily a SaaS tool. So it helps with metrics, reporting, all that sort of stuff. But they have a really, really cool new tool called Forecast Plus. And Forecast Plus helps you do exactly what I was saying before, where you can plan for the best case scenario, general, your normal projection, and then
you can put markers in there for expansion, like buying another vehicle, getting another apprentice on, things like that,
and different tests you're going to do and see if what that looks like. But again, it'll come back to that Google Sheet or Xero. So I don't think it's worth looking at those tools until you've got it in place.
I find it the same with these, man. And preparing for this just got me thinking about it as well. I was like, I wonder if there's any like apps out there for like personal budgeting. And you look at them and they all want to charge you like $10 to $20 a month for their, pro version of the app.
It's generally through banks and stuff as well.
So stupid. Yeah, and then they want you to do this third-party integration with your bank, which is just like fraught with danger to start with. But it just screams to me of they just don't have the flexibility. You can't do what you want. And it's just too complex. They try to have like all these little features that people have requested, which just makes it hard. And I find the same with like business budgets. It's often the easiest solution is just something that you can Make it your own.
Yourself.
Make
Yeah,
it so
customize it.
simple and just build out a Google Sheet, Excel, whatever it's going to be, because it's not, you just need somewhere to start. And if you're looking for somewhere to start for like a business template, as Andrew said, we can provide them. Personal-wise, moneysmart.gov.au, if you're an Australian, has some personal budget templates. I find they're a bit too complex, though, for me. I like to keep it quite basic. And then business.gov.au also has business templates for a budget. Once again, I still think that they're created by government, finance, like economics employees.
Yeah,
and
very rigid.
They just over-engineer these spreadsheets to the point where you don't need it like that. But it just provides the most flexible tool you can use to really, nail down that budget and make it how you want it.
Yeah, and everything comes back to adoption, right? Whether it's a software, like whether it's a CRM, whether it's a budget. If
no one wants to
you
use
can
it,
personalize it and you understand it, then it's going to be more common that you're doing it regularly. So, if you can make the budget reconciliation really, really easy, you press a button on Xero to reconcile your books, and then you export that and put it into Google Sheet, then it's going to take 5 minutes rather than making it really, really complex. So, yeah, Google Sheets is a massive one. Bear Metrics, check it out. Once you've got the Google Sheet, I think Forecast Plus is really cool for that forecasting future, scenario planning. And then the last one,
I think Forecast Plus, to be honest, is probably for businesses that are either a bit more complex or have a bit more financial infrastructure around them. So if you've got a CFO, things like that, that's where Forecast Plus is really, really good. But if you have like really complex financial situation where you need to plan out those scenarios, definitely recommend Forecast Plus. But it's you just need to be prepared to invest the time to get the value.
Yeah.
So it's like that user adoption thing, right? Because you're essentially, when you do each of those forecasts, it's like you're creating, it's less effort, but you're almost creating another budget.
New budget, yeah. And like, take a step back. If you wanted to do it, you probably could do it in a Google Sheet. Like you could have in your revenue, actuals, and then worst case, best case, and just add a percentage multiplier on those two lines to see where you're at. But the last one we've spoke about Xero a lot today. Your accounting tool, so Xero and QuickBooks. But let's make it really clear. This is like your bookkeeping tool. This isn't a budget. This will help you budget, but it's not a budget. Those tools are really good for reports, for financial tracking, and ensuring that accuracy. So once you reconcile your bank transactions per month or whatever it is, then going and reconciling your budget plan to see your forecast versus your actuals. Anything else you got, Abe?
No. The only point that I added at the end there was books. And I'm not going to tell you to go read this like economics or financial planning book, because
Accounting 101.
They're quite boring and no one's actually going to get through the full book. You might buy it with good intentions and sit it on the shelf or something like that. But the book that I have got in there, and this goes under like last week when someone was asked about a reading list, maybe it's a good idea to just put like, hey, out of today's topic, what's a good thing that you should read to further gain knowledge on it. So The Art of Profitability is, have you read The Art of Profitability?
I have not. I've got it downloaded in my Audible, but I have not had the time yet. Maybe I'll do it when I go running. I'll listen to it.
So never.
Can I listen to it while I'm playing rugby?
Yeah. But The Art of Profitability. So the reason I like it is because it's set more like a novel, where it's essentially this intern that wants to learn more about profitability and has a mentor that he goes and visits like every Saturday morning or something like that, right? And so he rocks up to see the mentor, and the mentor gives him a story and a problem to solve and essentially educates him through this process. It's really like an engaging story. But at the end of each chapter, the story is actually based on some activities that a real person has done, which makes it really good. So, for instance, one of the chapters is actually about Walmart and what Sam Walton did. And so at the end of the chapter, it says, hey, here's a reading list. Here's his books that are examples of this. And one of the best things about reading this book is you get some really wicked examples of great books to go and read to follow on from that, right? So, like Sam Walton, like his book on Walmart, man, it's incredible to hear his story and some of the things that he did. Like, it's just amazing, his story, right? Then there's, I can't even remember, there's like 6 or 7 books that I went and read as a result of reading The Art of Profitability because they seemed interesting. So definitely worth a read to understand how to increase profit margins in your business, different ways to do pricing, and how to get the most out of your revenue, but then also to follow on with that to understand, like, within your industry, some of the best books. It's an older book, but it has stood the test of time.
Nice.
And I think that brings us to a close.
It does. I've gone through 2 beers. I don't want to drink another one because I need to go and buy lunch.
Technically just about gone through.
But I guess while Abe is sculling his beer,
that's good.
Always,
that was a really good beer. If you're ever going through Dubbo, and also
you might have to send me some in the mail.
I'll see if I can. I was talking to the owner about it, and they're actually, so this is an interesting story about profits, right? They have come to the realization that selling their beer externally to their brew pub is actually not a profitable experience. When you look at the time spent on the road, delivering the beers, the cost of the vehicle, the cost of the fuel, getting it out, what you sell it for, and canning it. So they're actually thinking about reducing their canned line because they don't sell enough of it, and the profit margins aren't great enough, and they've got enough foot traffic through the pub that they don't actually need to. And so they're like, it's not a profitable business selling cans. And she actually said, a very, very savvy woman on business, said that there's a reason that all of these craft breweries are starting to go out of business, and it's because they've overextended themselves, made commitments for low price to get their beer out there on the market, and it's not a profitable experience. And it's like, oh man, like, you are on the money.
All over it. Get her on.
Get her on. I reckon she'd. I might actually be able to go down to the brew pub and sit there with her.
Yeah.
And me and her can be in person. You can be. Maybe you can come to Dubbo, mate. Bring the kids to the zoo.
Fly me down. Your expenses. You pay.
My expenses. Yeah, good to go. Yeah. I'll put it in the budget, mate, when I do my zero-based budget this weekend. Yeah, I'll put it as activity-based budget.
Cancel Netflix and pay for me.
Yeah, avocado on toast, mate. That's the Boomers' response to it, right, mate? Yeah, just cut out that avo on toast in the morning, you'll be right.
Be able to buy a house.
But yeah, very savvy businesswoman, and yeah, credit to her, great beer as well. But that brings us to a close, right? So like and subscribe. Beers and Business Pod, Instagram. Andrew got a video on TikTok. It got like 200 views. He was so happy with it.
Oh, going viral.
YouTube. But Instagram really is the main one where we'll post everything up. Episodes come out Tuesday, 10 a.m. Every week. Yeah, questions in, topics, guests that you want to see on. Please let us know and tune in Tuesday, 10 a.m. next week.
We'll see you then. Go
We're on
Queensland.
Spotify, we're on YouTube, we're on Apple Podcasts. Go and listen and give us a review. A good one.
Cheers.
If you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all. All right. Cheers, everyone.
Radio. See you next time.
Bye.